If you're a Helldivers fan, chances are you are very familiar with what is now the rather infamous Democracy Space Station. The community had to work for, I think, over a month straight, completing numerous different major orders to collect all of the materials and reclaim various planets just to get this one thing built. And once it was finally built and turned on for the first time, what were we rewarded with? A non-stop, map-wide, completely random, and undirected orbital bombardment that mostly just killed the Helldivers that fought for the construction of this damn station more than any of the enemies that it was actually pointed at. So yeah, when this thing launched, it was kind of an unmitigated disaster, though I will admit that the temporary hotfix was probably the most Helldivers solution they could have come up with, because how do they solve the problem of a non-stop orbital barrage killing people? By turning it off, or stopping it, or aiming it wider? No, of course not. That would be undemocratic. They just gave everyone free shield backpacks in the meantime, so that you could at least tank one of the random explosions before you get killed by a second one. Like, for as annoying as the whole situation was at the time, I gotta admit that was a hilarious hotfix and I kinda loved it. But yeah, eventually they came up with a better long-term solution that reworked how some of the systems in the DSS worked, and it's at least a fair bit better now than it once was. But a lot of players I've noticed still admit that overall, it's still pretty underwhelming. Like I said, we spent months building this thing. It had a huge amount of hype behind it, as we were all like expecting it to be this like massive game changer when it came out. And nowadays, the fact that it just kind of lives on as a footnote makes it kind of feel like we wasted a ton of time and effort. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Like, let's analyze what is good and not so good about the Democracy Space Station, try to figure out what makes it feel so underwhelming to so many players like myself, and try to brainstorm up some ideas for how we could improve it and make it into a much more impactful gameplay system for players to enjoy during missions. But before we get started, remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy the video. I'm hoping to break that 10,000 subscriber milestone before the end of the year in 2046, and I think I'm on a pretty good pace to do so. Also, once again, big thank you to all of my supporter on Ko-Fi. Links in the description if you want to help the channel grow. So to start things off, let's talk about the good parts of the DSS, because at its core, I think that the DSS actually is a very important system to have in a game like this with a really solid core idea, that being that it is a massive resource dump. For most players, chances are that even if you play fairly regularly, you probably haven't unlocked literally everything in the game just yet. A lot of those final ship upgrades can cost a ton of samples, and after all, and depending on how many war bonds you've got, like, you'll always need medals and requisition slips and all that jazz. So for a lot of players, there's plenty of content in the game to grind for. But for the most hardcore players that play this game religiously, chances are that they've unlocked everything ages ago, and as a result, they don't even bother collecting things like samples anymore because they've already maxed out their personal storage, and even if they hadn't, it's not like there's anything left for them to buy. But this is where the value of adding the DSS to the game shines, because it acts as a place to dump all of those excess resources in mass, and thus give those players who have unlocked everything a reason to actually gather those materials again. And I mean, even if you're not a more hardcore player who's already unlocked everything, it's really only a matter of time until you do, and so eventually the DSS will show its value to more and more people over time. So right off the bat, I think that this is a great design element of this mechanic. It basically creates an end game grind system, for lack of a better term, so that high level players still have something to work towards at all times. And in turn, it means that the players that will have the most influence over the DSS are probably going to be the players who play the game the most, which I think kind of makes sense for the kind of game that this is. It also acts as a really fun, tangible way for players to have an impact on the galactic warfront. By default, you can only really contribute to the warfront by, well, fighting and completing missions and trying to reclaim planets and whatnot, but the DSS lets the community as a whole vote to reposition it to key planets, to help provide extra defenses or offenses at various times, both buffing the actual gameplay on the planet, but also modifying the scale of the galactic warfront itself. These are all good things that I think the DSS adds to the game, and if anything, I'd like to see more elements added that accomplish these kinds of goals. But in my opinion, that is about where the good design elements end, so let's talk about what it actually does mechanically during missions and why a lot of people find it so underwhelming. So there are essentially three main modes that you can activate with the DSS by donating enough resources of the appropriate type in order to activate that system. First, we have the orbital bombardment, which, like I said at the start, this was the one that was designed in such a way that it ended up killing more Helldivers than anything else. Like, it literally was just a non-stop, constant, map-wide, completely random bombardment that would just indiscriminately blow up anything that it happened to hit. I think it goes without saying as to why this was not great, but just to state the obvious, getting randomly killed by explosions that you have absolutely no control over is not exactly a fun gameplay experience. Like, it's funny for like the first couple of minutes, but then when you realize that the entire planet and all of the missions on it are going to be like this for the entire day, yeah, it kind of wears thin pretty quickly. But even if we put aside the team killing aspect of it, it's still not a particularly interesting gameplay mechanic. Like, let's say that we simply modify the blasts so that they always happen at least far enough away from any players to avoid damaging them. What we're left with is still just a bunch of random explosions that the players have absolutely zero control over. There's no agency given to us Helldivers for when it activates or where on the map it does. You're basically just left playing the game as normal, and maybe every once in a while you'll get lucky and suddenly a random objective complete will happen out of nowhere because a random explosion just happened to kill an enemy base without any player input. They eventually updated this action to now, instead of just randomly performing bombardments, it simply gives all players on the mission a free 380 orbital stratagem, which I think is a vast improvement. Now, not only does it not randomly kill everyone all the time, but it actually puts the player of the action in the player's hands, so that now you get to actually throw the stratagem and activate it yourself. And because everybody has it, you know, you still get a lot of bombardments happening all over the map. And I mean, everyone loves free extra stratagems when they just hand them out like this. So I think that this is a vast improvement. So, like, it's not perfect. Like, the 380 is far from my preferred orbital stratagem. So I think that there's still room for improvement. But at least out of the three actions that the DSS can perform, right now I like this one the most. As for the other two, well then next we have the Eagle Storm, which is similar in concept to the orbital bombardment, but instead of random explosions from space, it's random Eagle airstrikes from the sky. It's functionally very similar to the original bombardment ability, but considering that it hasn't been reworked completely since launch, it seems to be much better at least not killing Helldivers. I mean, it still happens, don't get me wrong, but it's at least within acceptable margins. Though, similar to the problems I had with the original bombardment action, the players don't really have any actual agency over this ability. Once again, it just kind of triggers random attacks all over the map with no real rhyme or reason. So, like, yeah, it's a lot more effective and less frustrating than the bombardment was, but it's still not exactly that interesting to use or even play around. Like, again, if you get lucky, maybe an airstrike will happen to land on the bunch of enemies that are attacking you and save your life, but that's really all you can hope for, is to get lucky. And blind random chance just doesn't tend to make for a very good gameplay system. But okay, moving on to the last one, finally we have the blockade action, which is by far the simplest, with it simply giving everyone the Hellpod Space Optimization Booster, which is the one that always makes sure that you deploy fully stocked on ammo and grenades and stuff. It's very simple but effective. But once again, it doesn't really add much to the gameplay. Like, yeah, it is one of the better boosters to have, and just always having it equipped so that you can use another booster is nice, but it is literally just a numerical buff and nothing else. So it doesn't actually really give the players anything extra that they can do. It just makes you slightly better in general. So, if we zoom out and we look at all three of these actions together, I think that the reason why the Democracy Space Station feels so underwhelming is because of the lack of agency. The Eagle Storm, the Blockade, and the original Bombardment all don't actually give the player anything to do while they're active. They just provide some bonus or map modifier that is entirely outside of the player's control. It was only after they changed the Bombardment action that we actually gained any agency over how any of these actions affected the on-the-ground gameplay directly. And even then, that action has the longest cooldown, so it's active the least often. Because yeah, on top of the lack of agency, these actions also have fairly lengthy cooldowns. Like the Blockade only takes 2 days before it becomes active, but it's also the least interesting out of the three. Then you have the Eagle Storm, which takes 4 days to recharge, and the Bombardment, the one that actually currently gives the players any amount of agency at all, takes nearly a full week to recharge. So basically, if you're a more casual player and you were to log on any given day, then you only have like a 1 in 4 chance of the Eagle Storm being active and a 1 in 6 chance of the Bombardment being active on that day, and that's assuming that they meet their donation thresholds within their cooldown, which does explain why it feels like most of the times that I log on that the DSS is barely even doing anything, which I'm sure was only adding to the feeling that the station is just underwhelming. But okay, so I think we've identified some of the core issues with the station. So what can we do to address these issues and actually make the Democracy Space Station feel like a proper monument to freedom and liberation? Right off the bat, I think that the new Bombardment action is a good template for us to work off of. It is the only one that actually gives the players something to play with directly, letting them use the stratagem that it grants themselves. But I don't think the answer is just as simple as turning all of the options into stratagems. Like, yeah, we could replace the Eagle Storm with just giving everyone free Eagle airstrikes, and I do think that would be an improvement, but we're still left with a station that I feel only does something noteworthy about once a week, and it only has 3 things that it can do overall. So I think we need a more fundamental overhaul of how the DSS works. So here's my idea. What if we expanded the Bombardment and the Eagle Storm actions to cover all of the Orbital and Eagle stratagems in the game? To clarify, I say that we add more voting to the way that the station works. More democracy, if you will. So, for example, with the Bombardment action, since it already gives out a stratagem, what if instead of it always giving out 380s, we could vote on any of the orbital stratagems in the game? You know, lasers, precision strikes, napalm, whatever you want. And whatever orbital gets the most votes, that's the one that is handed out for free when the Bombardment action is active. And we could do the same thing for the Eagle Storm, but instead of it being orbitals, we could obviously make it Eagle stratagem. So instead of it always being Eagle airstrikes happening all over the map, we could make it Gatling runs, rocket pods, or even 500 kgs. So not only are we giving the players a lot more agency by granting the players the extra stratagems themselves for them to use, but we are also vastly expanding the variety of what the DSS is capable of. And I feel like overall, this kind of reinforces the core gameplay loop of the game. Even for the Blockade action, which currently only gives us the space optimization booster, maybe that could be upgraded to hand out support weapon stratagems like HMGs or quasar cannons and whatnot, so that we can still vote on stuff there, though we might be a little bit more selective as to which stratagems fit within the Blockade sort of ethos. But I think that things like support weapons, or hell, maybe even vehicles or even mechs, could be a fun thing to have the DSS deploying for players to play with. Now, I already think that this is a vast improvement that would really make the DSS feel like a proper powerhouse. I mean, if our super destroyers can be reconfigured every mission to provide such a wide variety of stratagems for us, how come this gigantic space station that we spent months building only has 3 possible modes? But I do think that there is still more to do, because we may have accidentally introduced some new problems with this rework. Like, for example, you can't tell me that if we let the community vote on getting a free Eagle stratagem whenever we wanted, that they wouldn't just always pick something like the 500 kg bomb every single time. Like, let's be honest here, you know, everyone would always just vote for the most powerful and meta stratagems every single time, and then in terms of variety, at least, we'd be back to square one with the DSS always doing the same things every time a particular action popped up. But what if we made it so that each individual stratagem had its own cooldown that was separate from the action itself, that prevented prevented people from voting for it again until the cooldown was off. So like, for example, if we activate the Eagle Storm and we all vote on giving out free 500 kg bombs for everyone, then once that day is over, the Eagle Storm action could go on a relatively short cooldown for say just a couple of days before we can activate it again, reducing the cooldown time of the action itself. But the 500 kg option specifically might have a cooldown of a week or 2 weeks or even longer, so that even if we reactivate the Eagle Storm right away, then we would have had to have voted on a different stratagem to be active than the last one. And then once that use of the Eagle Storm is used up, then that second stratagem would go on cooldown too, along with the 500 kgs, and then we'd have to pick a third one the next time we activated it. Like, hell, different stratagems might have different cooldowns of varying lengths if Arrowhead really feels the need to tweak those knobs a bit, depending on how it plays out. This would solve the problem of everyone always voting for the same stratagems over and over again. But on top of that, it would mean that each of the DSS actions themselves could be given a dramatically reduced cooldown. Ideally, in my opinion at least, it should be at least possible to have a nearly 100% uptime with the DSS. That way it's always doing something to the planet that it's hovering over and modifying the missions all the time. So reducing the cooldown of the actions themselves to just 2 or 3 days each should make that possible. And despite having the shorter cooldowns, every action would be cycling through tons of different stratagem bonuses every time we activate them, making the DSS feel like it's always doing something different, even if we activated the same bonus multiple times in a row. The only other wrinkle to this sort of cooldown rework would be trying to figure out how to reincorporate the galactic scale benefits back into this system, because if we have each of these actions active all that much more often, just with them varying the gameplay bonuses they give out, then I imagine it would probably mess up the balance of how the DSS impacts the galactic warfront. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I would imagine that they would probably need to change. And I mean, maybe it's that simple, like we just need to adjust the numbers, maybe nerf a couple of things here or there, and how much it buffs liberation and defense campaigns, and then we can call it a day. Or maybe we could make those actions that buff the galactic warfront like into their own things that we can vote for, but activate separately at the same time as the more stratagem-focused actions. That way, those could keep their longer cooldowns individually, while the DSS provides stratagems to Helldivers in the meantime while they're inactive. Like, I mean, I'll be real honest, I wasn't really terribly concerned with balancing the galactic scale side of the DSS, but by all means, feel free to give me some suggestions in the comments if you have some ideas for how to maybe modify the galactic size scale of the DSS's systems. But yeah, so to recap, we've essentially reworked the Democracy Space Station into a community-run bonus stratagem deployer. That way players now have a lot more agency and control over how the bonuses are used during missions, and we don't have to rely as much on luck anymore, just hoping for random explosions to kill our enemies for us. And on top of that, instead of only being limited to 3 options, now the DSS can be equipped with most, if not all, of the Eagle and Orbital stratagems at the very least, giving it a lot more variety in what it can do, and maybe we could even throw on some weapon stratagems or vehicle stratagems on top of that if we're feeling spicy. And then finally, it can also have a nearly, if not totally, 100% uptime, so that as long as people keep donating enough, the DSS will always have something active to modify a planet's missions every time you log on, so that more people can enjoy the benefits of the DSS more frequently. I don't know about you, but to me, I feel like this makes the DSS way more fun to play with. I mean, who doesn't love it when they give out free extra stratagems to everyone, right? Plus, I imagine that if they end up having to nerf the galactic war bonuses to accommodate for the higher uptime, this could still end up having an indirect greater effect on the galactic war. Because as I imagine that on days where, say, the DSS is handing out like free 500 kgs or orbital lasers and other powerful stratagems like that, it would cause tons of more players to flock to whatever planet it's currently orbiting, and as a result, that planet would get a massive boost in all of the missions being performed on it. But as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on this version of the DSS compared to its current state? And do you have any ideas of your own for how you would change the DSS? Like, feel free to let me know and share your thoughts in the comments. But for now, remember to hit that like button if you like the video, subscribe and ring that bell if you want to watch more content like this in the future. If you want to help the channel out more directly, there's a link to my Ko-Fi in the description down below. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.